All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corbin Campbell. I am the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs from American University School of Education, and it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to be able to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon. I always feel so privileged to be a part of these conversations with educators, and specifically, today, I want to tell you a little bit about this webinar series. In a COVID-19 educational time and space, educators need new tools and new ideas to continue to foster teaching and learning in an equitable and excellent way. And this is exactly why American University School of Education faculty will host a webinar series to support educators and education leaders in this endeavor. And we are hosting this webinar series every Friday from 3 to 4 p.m. We've already had a few of these webinars, and we're so fortunate to have Dr. Carolyn Parker to lead us in our discussion today. As you know, the topic for this afternoon is setting up and maintaining an online science classroom for success. And I could not think of a topic that is more important in this time when we know that there are so many different kinds of inequities and education gaps taking place across all different subject matter, but there's a real special question around how to best support science learners. And we know that science education generally has deep equity questions and gaps in both success and continuation into, for example, post-secondary education and beyond. And so it's with that and that kind of spirit that I'm so pleased that we can host this webinar, and that Dr. Carolyn Parker, who's the program director of our Master's in Teaching, is willing to give her time this evening to talk with you about her own perspectives, and has also convened an incredible panel for you to discuss some of the really excellent resources that exist and can be virtual for science education. To tell you a little bit about Dr. Parker. Dr. Parker, as I mentioned, is the director of the Master's of Arts in Teaching program in the School of Education here at American University. I wish we could welcome you directly to campus, but the best I can do is virtual here. Dr. Parker began her career as a science educator as a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala. Upon her return to the United States, she earned an MA in science teaching and then taught high school science in New York State and Miami, Florida. Dr. Parker earned her PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of Maryland, College Park. And Dr. Parker's current research focus is twofold, focusing on teacher education and issues of equity and access in STEM education. Most recently, Dr. Parker was a principal investigator of a National Science Foundation Math Science Partnership Award, STEM Achievement in Baltimore elementary schools. And this project served 9 high poverty Baltimore City elementary schools by improving STEM curriculum and instruction. I'll also mention that Dr. Parker has authored numerous book chapters, technical reports, and peer-reviewed papers. And her work appears in several prestigious journals related to science education and science teaching. And so for all those reasons, you are in excellent hands this evening for this conversation, and I'm just so pleased that she's willing to facilitate this conversation. I will let Dr. Parker introduce her own panelists, but I did want to mention that as a part of this webinar, we will have time for question and answer, and Dr. Parker will describe how that will facilitate in this particular webinar. But you should know that the chat function has been disabled for participants. So if you do have questions, you should type that into the section of your Zoom at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. So just wanted to let participants know that. And with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Parker.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. It's with great pleasure that I'm here with you this afternoon. I've brought 2 experts in science education to share with you resources. Reuben Brenner-Adams from the Smithsonian Science Education Center will share resources from the Smithsonian, and Dr. Susan Kowalski, who's a division director in research and senior research scientist from BSCS of Science Learning, will share resources with you, and I'll be sharing the time for this hour webinar with them. But it was with great pleasure that I put this together because science has never been so important as now. If you haven't noticed, we are in a global pandemic. And the understanding of what's going on with the pandemic and what's going on with the COVID-19 virus is just so important from the perspective of general science literacy for people to understand. And then we have policymakers and leaders who are creating erroneous understanding of the pandemic and science education. So in some ways, it's been, for me, a very, very sad week in science education. But in other ways, we want to celebrate science. And we want to make science accessible and equitably available to all students. Science oftentimes is not in the school setting equitably available to students for a variety of reasons. Issues of access, reduction of science in our elementary schools. Pre-COVID, only about 20% of our K through 3 students and 30% of our students in grades 4 through 6 had access to daily science instruction. So there are real issues of equity in science. And then moving the instruction online, as we've had to do across the United States, exacerbates that inequitable access to science. And William Tate, who's an eminent scholar in science education, really talked about at the beginning part of this century, the access of quality science education is a civil right. So again, there's never been a more important time for science education. We do have things to celebrate this week. As I started this out saying it's been a sad week for science education, I think. In other ways, it's been a really celebratory week. We've celebrated Earth Day, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day on Wednesday, April 22nd. And today we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope being put into orbit. So there are things to celebrate that I think are really important. Along with the COVID pandemic, we've in some ways seen a resurgence of our environment. We've seen air quality improve in China. We've seen fish and dolphins re-enter the canals of Venice. And in some ways, we've seen the rebirth of the Earth as we've all been quarantined. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of this pandemic, that I think will provide moments of reflection. But again, the importance of science, I think, has never been so great. So the webinar today, how we'll do this is I've given some opening remarks. I'll do a quick review of the next generation science standards. I know many of you on the webinar have experience with those standards. Then I'll turn the webinar over to Reuben Brenner-Adams from the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and he'll walk through some of the resources available there. Then Susan Kowalski will take over and present to you an online, a curriculum resource that had been produced for face-to-face instruction that has now been adapted for online instruction. We'll do question and answer after each of the speakers. And then at the end of the webinar, I will provide some additional resources. And how I went about selecting and kind of vetting all of these resources is that they will be readily available. They are free. And they've been looked at with an eye that they've been written by experts. So they are quality materials that teachers and educators can adapt and adopt into the online environment, again, to create an equitable and accessible platform for students who are now experience science in the online setting. We'll also have an additional webinar on May 6th focused on caregivers and families, 7 o'clock at night, that's a Wednesday, that will focus on resources and things that caregivers and families can use with their own children. This particular webinar is focused for educators. And then we'll wrap up with questions and answers, any remaining questions and answers. So a quick overview of next generation science standards. 2012, the science education community, or actually before that, acknowledged and recognized that there needed to be a new approach or reformed approach to science education, and adopted the next generation science standards. The next generation science standards take what's called a three-dimensional approach to the teaching and learning in science, and they organize learning around the science and engineering practices, how people think and behave and have the attributes, the behavioral attributes, like a science and engineer, such as questioning, such as communicating important science ideas, such as looking at data. There's also the disciplinary core ideas, which are referencing more what's important, what are the seminal topics, what are the seminal content that a student would find necessary that's related to engineering, earth and space science, physical science, and the life sciences. And then finally, there are cross-cutting concepts that are themes that connect those four major disciplines of science and engineering. At this point, I believe it's 37 states that have adopted the next generation science standards, and there's curriculum now being produced that's aligned to the science standards. What I find from the teacher education perspective, one of the most useful parts of the next generation science standards is the centering of a phenomena that centers the instruction in a K-12 classroom. And I think particularly in the online setting, that's something I would strongly encourage teachers and educators to really think about, to choose a phenomena that would be easily accessible, easily studied for students, that teachers can take a bite of instruction to present to students. A phenomena should be something that's readily observable for students, that they can look outside their home. In my elementary methods class, I use phases of the moon, and I have my beginning science teachers at the elementary level go out and observe the moon for a moon cycle, so that they can then replicate that exercise in their own classroom. That phenomena approach, that phenomena-driven approach, really helps set the stage for science and engineering exploration for students, and I think is really, really important. It helps develop a sense of relevancy for science for students. Science is easily accessible, it's all around us. It helps develop some student interest. And it helps support what's called student agency, that intrinsic learning, that, hey, a student wants to go out and learn about the phases of the moon. And that learning can be very, very self-directed. Everyday phenomena are around us. Last night was my last night of an online elementary methods class, and one of my students wrote a phenomenal unit about shadows and having her students measure shadows in relationship to the height of the sun. And this particular unit, 5 lessons, was for second graders. So take your students out, ask them to go out and measure their shadow at different points of the day and see how that length of the shadow changes, relating that to how the sun at different points in the day. A puddle evaporating is a very easy way to illustrate water cycle and phase change. You know, rains, puddles form. Where does that puddle go after a few hours? Where does the water go in that puddle? What did it turn into? It didn't just poof, disappear. There is a cycle, there is a phase change that goes along with that puddle. We're in springtime right now. I've got some sweet seeds ready to go out into my garden. Have your students plant some seeds. You know, it can be something simple as a corn seed, an avocado pit. Have them observe some seed sprouting. And then I think this is on the Next Generation site, a pet drinking water is a marvelous way to look at surface tension, to look at some of the physical properties of water that's just easily, again, accessible for students in their own house. It helps them become interested. It gives them a point of interest that they then can explain science from. So I wanted to point that out. I want to get you thinking, and most of all, I wanted to get you primed to learn about some very specific curriculum materials that are available to you. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Reuben Brenner-Adams to talk about resources available from the Smithsonian.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
So, hello, everyone. Thank you to Dr. Parker and to the AU School of Education for having me here today. My name is Reuben Brenner-Adams, and I'm an interactive developer at the Smithsonian Science Education Center, which is a small educational unit of the Smithsonian Institution here in Washington, D.C. What I'm going to do in this presentation is first explain a little bit about what the Smithsonian Science Education Center is and what we do. And then I'm going to walk you through a couple of highlighted free resources that might be helpful to educators during this time or any other time. And then I'm going to touch on a couple of other free resources that the Smithsonian Science Education Center offers. But I want to start with the Smithsonian Institution. So many people know this building, the Smithsonian Castle. Many people know the Smithsonian Institution for its museums, but the institution is actually the world's largest museum, education, and research complex with 19 museums, many of which are around the National Mall in Washington, D.C., but we also have museums in New York City, in Virginia, and we also have 9 research centers, 5 education centers, 3 cultural centers, 21 libraries, and a zoo. And these are scattered all around the world. All of these centers and museums, libraries, and zoos have resources that are free to the public. Unfortunately, right now, the public isn't able to visit our museums or our zoo, but there are still a lot of resources that are available for free online that you can access for you and your students. So the Smithsonian believes in lifelong experiential learning, and you'll notice that all of these pictures were taken before the coronavirus hit. But it's still true that the Smithsonian believes in lifelong experiential learning, and it's still true that we believe that experiential learning can happen at home, it can happen in quarantine, and you can still do hands-on and amazing activities from the comfort of your own home. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper on what the Smithsonian Science Education Center is. That's the organization that I represent. It's the only Smithsonian organization dedicated to formal classroom STEM education. And our mission is to transform the teaching and learning of science for all students throughout the world. So you may be wondering how we do that. So we have 2 major divisions, functional divisions. One is curriculum and communications, and the other is professional services. So professional services focuses on professional development and leadership development for educators, administrators, and others in the educational system. And right now, they're really retooling a lot of their professional development and leadership development to make it useful for distance learning and virtual learning. So keep an eye out for some announcements about our professional services offerings for the summer and the coming year. But the part that I'm really going to focus on is curriculum and communication. So that's the division that I'm a part of as an interactive developer. Curriculum and communications is focused on 2 things. One is developing primarily K-12 curriculum that can be used in schools across the country and around the world. That curriculum is aligned to next generation science standards, but also aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, depending on which curriculum you're talking about. So I'll get into that a little bit more later. And then the part that I'm directly involved with is the creation of digital assets, both those that support the K-12 curriculum that we create, and also those that can stand alone as educational experiences. So I'm going to jump straight in and talk about our free curriculum, Smithsonian Science for Global Goals. Smithsonian Science for Global Goals is as I said, a free curriculum, and as the name suggests, it is globally focused. It is aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it is meant for students ages 8 to 17, though I think there are certainly activities within the curriculum that would be good for younger students, and there are absolutely activities that everyone, even adults, can learn from in these curricula. So the 2 modules of the curriculum that we have released so far are mosquito, how can we ensure health for all from mosquito-borne diseases, and food, how do we ensure good nutrition for all. And you'll notice that these on their covers both say community research guide, and there's a really specific reason for that. We don't see this as a curriculum that needs to be didactic from teacher to student exclusively. We see this as a way for students to have some instruction and possibly to engage elders, parents, guardians, and other members of their community in issues that really matter to them locally. So, for example, there may be activities in the mosquito module about what the actual issues are in the students' community regarding mosquito control and mosquito breeding. Maybe it is the collection of rainwater in barrels. Maybe that's something that's really important to the community and that provides a breeding ground for mosquitoes, but that brings up a whole bunch of conversations that are locally focused, but also have global consequences. So I think that's the thing about Smithsonian Science for Global Goals that I find really amazing and really cool. These curricula are, like I said, based on various UN Sustainable Development Goals, and they have been field tested in classrooms around the world in different countries, and they also have input from scientists from many different countries of the world. So like I said, they're globally focused, and I think there are activities in there that are good for a wide variety of students. And so I wanted to also highlight a game that goes along with the food module, how do we ensure good nutrition for all? It's called Pick Your Plate, a global guide to nutrition. And this is something that I, as an interactive developer, have been working on for the last 8 months or so, and it was recently released. Pick Your Plate is a game about students traveling to different countries virtually. Obviously, we can't do that physically right now, but students will travel to different countries and choose from dishes in the local cuisine to meet that country's nutrition standards. And so I wanted to walk you through a little bit of how the game works. So the student starts off and sees this map. As you can see, there are 5 countries that we've released so far: the US, Finland, Lebanon, Benin, and Australia, and 3 more countries coming soon: Mexico, Argentina, and Cambodia. And so the student picks a country, and they see on the right-hand side of the screen that country's nutrition guide. They see the currency on the bottom left, so everything is localized into the local currency. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, they see a description of that country's food guide, and as well as the name of the country and the flag at the top. Once they enter the country and start playing, they are shown 3 meals, so a morning meal, a midday meal, and an evening meal in succession. And during each meal, they have to choose pick, in this case, what they want to eat, pick the plates that they want to eat. and they are constrained by budget, which is in the local currency, and the foods the plates are based on the local cuisine. And on the right-hand side, you can see that throughout the 3 daily meals, the student is tasked with filling up all of the different nutrition categories, in this case, dairy, fruits, vegetables, grains, and protein, while limiting their intake of salt, sugar, and fat. And all of that and all of the numbers behind that are based on the regulations and guidelines from the USDA or the equivalent organization in the country that the student is playing in. So that's a quick summary of Pick Your Plate. It's intended for middle school audiences, but it is really fun for younger kids, just to sort of see what they might be eating in different countries and how that might stack up with nutrition. And it's also fun for older audiences. I've had adults play it and have a lot of fun as well. So I think it's a really enjoyable and educational experience. The thing that I think is especially cool about Pick Your Plate is that not only does it allow students to understand which different foods meet different nutrition standards, it also allows them to compare and contrast the nutrition standards in different countries. So for example, in Finland, there's a particular category in the nutrition guidelines that is dedicated to fish, in addition to the category that's dedicated to protein. And so students might wonder and might be able to ponder, why is that? Why would fish be important to the Finnish culture, Finnish economy, or other factors that could contribute to it being its own category in the Finnish food guides? And that's true for many different countries across the world. They have special categories that are in their nutrition standards that are specific to that country and are based on that country's culture. And so that's the part that I think is really powerful about a simulation like this. I'm going to walk you through a lot more quickly a couple of other resources that are, I think you might find helpful during distance learning. This one is Tammy's Tower. Let's think about engineering. This is an NGSS aligned engineering design game for grades K through 2, although I think it's, again, I think it's fun for younger or older audiences as well. Tammy's Tower, Let's Think About Engineering, is a game where you are tasked with building a tower out of simple geometric shapes so that a small monkey can climb up and reach the fruit on the branch overhead. However, larger animals that you can see on the left of that picture are going to be running by and shaking the ground, so your tower has to be structurally stable enough to stand up even through the shaking. So it's all about connecting simple shapes to their physical functions. Morphy is a game about life science, about biodiversity for grades 3 through 5. In the game, you play as an alien whose ship has crash landed on a planet, and the crew has been scattered throughout the planet, and so you have to traverse various environs to find your crew and bring them back to the ship. However, in order to do that, you're going to have to mimic the biological adaptations, the physical adaptations of the animals that exist in this environment in order to traverse the environment and solve the puzzles that are needed to find all of the crew. Bumper Ducks is a game about Newton's 3 laws of motion. It's for middle schoolers in physical science, and the goal is to use the properties of mass and momentum and acceleration to help the duck on the pond reach the cake. So it's a simple concept, but I think the emergent play that's involved in this one is really interesting and cool. Expedition Insects is a free ebook that we provide. It's about insects in the Amazon rainforest, and it's good for an elementary school age group. Explore Smithsonian is a video series where students are taken behind the scenes at various Smithsonian museums and units, including the National Zoo, as is exhibited here a lot. And they are introduced to interesting innovations and interesting practices that happen behind the scenes at the Smithsonian, including for the lions, different colors of glitter are mixed into different lions' food, so that when the scientists at the National Zoo are examining the feces of the different lions, they can tell them apart, and they have been able to diagnose disease much more easily, disease and other problems with the lions much more easily, because they're able to identify the feces of each lion due to the glitter that's still present after they've eaten the meat. So the Explore Smithsonian is just sort of taking you behind the scenes into different processes going on at the Smithsonian. So all of these digital products, I want to talk a little bit about the core principles. They are all aligned to educational standards, like I've said. They're all good for use in the classroom or at home, or in this case, in a home classroom, as the case may be. All have been tested with students and educators across the country and around the world. For the digital games and simulations, they are a multi-platform, and we try to make them as accessible as possible for all learners, including audio and text interplay for early readers, and audio and print supporting materials for adults that are helping the students get their education, whether that's parents or caregivers or classroom educators. And as I've said, all of these resources are available for free. But you may be wondering, how can you access them? All of our resources are available on our website, which is scienceeducation.si.edu. Our curriculum can be found under the Curriculum and Resources tab, including Smithsonian Science for Global Goals, Explore Smithsonian, some activities involving girls and women in STEM, Smithsonian Science for Makerspaces, if students have access to various makerspaces equipment. For all of our distance learning resources, we have a special website for them, and that includes our games and simulations, as well as the curricula that I've mentioned. And for our games, we have a Game Center page that has all of the games and simulations on it. So that's a brief overview. Thank you very much for being here and for listening, and thank you to Dr. Parker for having me here.
Thank you, Reuben. I can't wait to get online and see play with some of the resources. I'll turn it over to Dr. Susan Kowalski, who will tell us about a medical mystery online. Again, it was a module that was written for face-to-face instruction. In our conversation, it's been transformed to be used online.
Thank you all to everyone for inviting me, and to everyone for being here. I'm going to emphasize this one resource, as Carolyn mentioned. This is a program that has been designed for face-to-face use, and but we've been thinking carefully about how to use it in an online setting during this COVID-19 era. And my name is Sue Kowalski, and I do work at BSCS Science Learning. I won't spend a lot of time talking about BSCS, but if you think about people who create curriculum materials, people who develop professional learning to help teachers teach those curriculum materials, and then do research on both of them, that sort of sums up what we do. Now, a medical mystery is a project that was a collaboration between BSCS Science Learning and Oregon Public Broadcasting. And this project was funded by the National Science Foundation, so we're very appreciative to them for their support. And I'm going to do a quick overview. Dr. Parker mentioned that phenomenon-based instruction is a good thing to do for NGSS instruction. And the unit I'm sharing with you today it does focus on a single phenomenon, and that single phenomenon has to do with a girl who gets very sick and loses a lot of weight. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But one of the things that makes this program so amenable to bringing to an online space is that it also is media rich with virtual tools and interactives and also animation. So I'll showcase a little bit of those as we go through today. It was designed for the NGSS. It has received a high rating from an Equip review, and it does engage students in all 3 dimensions simultaneously of the NGSS. So that's the cross-cutting concepts, the disciplinary core ideas, and science and engineering practices. It's also freely available. This is the website where you can get all of the resources. There's a student edition, which includes no registration fee or login required. Students can simply go to the site and begin work. There are also embedded interactives, animations, and the PDFs as well. So the handouts that go with the course are readily available to students. And then there's a teacher edition. That teacher edition is also free, but does require some registration. And the reason for that is because we want teachers to be able to have a password protective access to the teacher guide. There's also some nice embedded classroom video in the teacher edition that allows you to see some examples of how you might lead some of the more challenging discussions with students. And we do really support a storyline, not just for developing the story of how the disciplinary core ideas develop over time, but how to build a story of thinking about a single practice, or build a story about thinking about developing a single cross-cutting concept. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started showing you a little bit about the unit. And this is our landing page. And as I mentioned, this unit focuses on a girl named McKenna. And I mean, when McKenna was 13 years old, she started losing weight very quickly, and McKenna's parents and doctor were very worried. And the first piece of evidence that students receive is McKenna's doctor's note. And I have it up here. But they receive a doctor's note of McKenna that basically lists all of her symptoms by body system. And over 8 weeks, students study all of those symptoms and develop explanations for them. And at the end of the 8-week unit, students really develop an understanding not just of each body system and what its function is, but how the body systems interact and how it's possible to have symptoms have a problem in one body system affect many other body systems. So they think about things like brain fog and how that might be related to problems with the digestive system. And students really do first investigate the digestive system. And that was an interesting one to pull up. So they investigate McKenna, a healthy digestive system first, and they can basically select a food. And the first graph they get is what types of molecules and their quantities are in that food to begin with. And they can start digesting that food and trace it as it moves through the different organs in the body. And as they do, they see an animation and see a difference in the molecules between the previous state and where it is now. So this is the graham cracker in the mouth, that's the hashed, and the graham cracker by itself is hashed, and the graham cracker in the mouth is in the solid. And you can see that like glucose levels change. You get actually more glucose from in the mouth than was originally present in the graham cracker, and complex carbohydrates go down. And so students start to wonder about what might be the digestive function of the mouth. And you can step through all of the all of the organs in the digestive system. And as they are analyzing the data, students start to get an idea of the function of each organ. So for example, as they step through the small intestine, they see that the quantity of nutrients starts to diminish. And by the middle of the small intestine, some are gone altogether. So students start to wonder about what's happening to nutrients when they vanish from the small intestine. Where do they go? And there's some. So then in chapter 2, that was chapter 1. Chapter 2 focuses on cells and cell membranes and how it's possible for the nutrients to actually move from the inside of the small intestine to the rest of the body. And they also investigate McKenna's villi. They get some evidence later on that McKenna's villi are actually flattening, and that's some of the evidence that they use to help explain what's going on with McKenna. In chapter 3, Students start to consider chemical reactions in the body and how a person can survive on body stores if they don't get the nutrients they need. And it also helps them explain McKenna's weight loss, where that matter goes as she is losing so much weight. And finally, in chapter 4, students start to really put everything together. They think about the digestive system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and nervous system, and they develop a model to explain all of McKenna's symptoms based on how those body systems interact. So going back to my slides, I want to emphasize that this program was developed for face-to-face instruction. It assumes a lot of really rich interaction between the students and the teacher. So it would emphasize group work and revision of ideas based on feedback and collective knowledge production. So we really wanted to know, if this is a digital resource, can it really be used in an online setting? And so we've thought carefully about that, and we have some suggestions for teachers on how to make that work. So there's 3 key ideas that we would want teachers to really think about to bring any program online, and there are some pretty basic things. So the first thing, I'll list them, and then I'll talk about each one in more depth. The first one is to match the digital tool to the task. The second is to leverage work that students do asynchronously into any synchronous session you have, and attend to community building. So let's unpack those one at a time. We all know that there are a variety of digital tools out there that allow students to work together, to collaborate, to show what they know in an online setting, to turn in assignments. And it's really easy to fall in love with your favorite tool and use it in all settings and all tasks. But it's critical to remember that each tool has its limitations and its affordances. And tool selection should really be guided by the type of interaction that you want to happen. So are students interacting with other students verbally? Are students interacting with a diagram or text? Are students supposed to be interacting with the teacher in small groups or as a whole? And thinking about that kind of interaction can really help you think about which of these kinds of tools is really the right one for the job. And I created a little chart here. Padlet is a nice tool, but it's good for things like building a classroom poster and building on that poster over time. Google Doc with chat is great for small group writing. Flipgrid is a fun tool. Students can create videos of themselves. I would say that's great for community building and kinds of show and tell experiences. VoiceThread is a fun tool. If you're wanting students to interact with an image, there's times when we want students to look at a model of the body and sketch what they think is going on. I would think VoiceThread would be a great tool for that. And then there's the most resource intensive of all of these tools, and that would be a video conference. And those are really important for those times when you really need to bring the whole class together and get everyone on the same page. So match the digital tool to the task is the first principle when you're thinking about taking something like a medical mystery to an online space. And then we want to leverage the work done asynchronously in a synchronous session. So let me unpack that a little bit. By asynchronous work, asynchronous here, I really mean the work that students do on their own individually or in small groups outside of a joint classroom synchronous session. So when they're kind of off doing things on their own time. Synchronous work is when you bring students together either in a video conference like we are now. This would be a synchronous session. We're all doing the same thing at the same time. Or you can have a synchronous chat where everybody's asking questions in real time. But synchronous time is really that most scarce of resources. So I said video conference here. It's really video conference or any synchronous session. Think about that as a really scarce and valuable resource. And so you want to leverage that time really carefully. And to do that, it's great to actually take students' asynchronous work, make sure they're submitting their ideas to you in advance, and that you have enough time between their submission of ideas and before a synchronous session so you can really pick and choose what are really the sticking points the kids are having so you can focus your time in that synchronous session to make it as productive as possible. And like I said, identify those sticking points in advance. And when you do that, when kids see that you're diving into their asynchronous work and pulling it forward into the synchronous session, they feel really valued, that the things that they're doing offline are contributing to the class culture. And finally, this is so easy to overlook, but so critical in this time, is that you can't forget to attend to community building when you're working with students in any online setting, but science is in particular. So it's really important to check in with students. Students are going to be doing small group work. They might be having trouble with the technology. They might be having trouble with their peers. They might not be being heard or feeling like they're being heard or valued. So that kind of checking in with students one-on-one through email or through chat is really important on a regular basis. And encourage that small group work. Students can feel really isolated in this time. And if you are taking something like a medical mystery and giving them time and space to work together on a joint document that they submit as a group, that's going to really help build and maintain the community that you form throughout the year. And I would recommend that if you can at all, I know this is definitely not possible, but if you can, to get students around in a Zoom call like this or a video conference in some way, shape, or form, to have them see each other and connect with one another is a really, really great thing to do. And then you can use that opportunity to get all the kids on the same page with some of the most critical ideas. So I went through a lot here, and I went through it pretty fast. One thing that we have created is we've created this PDF resource that's supporting online instruction. So this is really about some tips for taking this medical mystery program that I've talked about and bringing it to online space. And so if you go to this website, this is where all of our resources are, but at the very, very bottom of the page is this PDF. And it showcases some tools that you might use. You don't have to use these tools. You could use some of your other favorites, but it gives you some ideas of which types of the course could be done asynchronously, could be done with a Google Chat, could be done with a Google Doc, could be done with VoiceThread, might be done with a Padlet. And what are those really key points that you'd want to use a video conference if you have that available? So thank you so much for Dr. Parker for inviting us to share our ideas, and it's been a lot of fun sharing a medical mystery with you.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Sue, for that. And thank you, Reuben, for the Smithsonian's resources. I'm going to quickly share a few more resources that I culled together with our librarian, and we'll put these PowerPoints up so that people have access to them. But our AU librarian, Hannah Park, helped me curate some more resources really focused on teachers and things that you can take almost immediately into your classroom. Again, they are free. And integrate what the three of us talked about today to create some very exciting, accessible, equity-oriented online sources for your science teaching and your classroom and your students. First and foremost would be the National Science Teaching Association, National Science Teachers Association, NSTA, which is a national organization of science teachers. Right now they're offering a free 30-day membership to all of their resources because of the COVID-19 crisis. And they've also culled together free resources, and I'll put this PowerPoint up. You can link onto that and look at all the free resources that NSTA has put together specifically for teachers. And I've been a member of NSTA, I won't say when I started teaching, but for basically my entire teaching career. It's just a fabulous place for resources. Teaching Books has also put together free resources for teachers that you can take those books, integrate them into your science teaching, and make that accessible for your students through the online platform. NASA has culled together and basically put all, and that's the National Aeronautic, I'm wondering what NASA stands for as I think about it. I always say NASA, but they've pulled together all of their educational resources into one place. I think some of the data analysis that you can do with some of the NASA data would be very impactful and help align your classroom well to an NGSS classroom. As I said, we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the launch of Hubble. And that's really important in the life of science. PBS Learning has put online so many and put together in one place so many of their free learning resources. And then 2 additional resources are Science Buddies and Science in the City. And we'll put this website up, we'll put this PowerPoint up on the School of Education website so that you can click on those resources and have them accessible to you. So at this point, we have a few minutes left. Are there questions we can address from the audience? I'll give a little wait time if people want to ask specific questions to our panelists.
And Carolyn, I want to make sure you see there's three questions queued in the Q&A already for you.
Okay.
So your first question is, are there virtual tours and teacher-oriented lessons available via the Smithsonian?
So a lot of the Smithsonian units are rapidly dealing with the virtual learning that's going on right now. And each unit is addressing the issue individually. I can only speak to the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and since we don't have any facilities to tour, we're not providing virtual tours, but the museums and other parts of the institution may be doing that in the form of virtual tours or virtual lessons or art exhibitions, that kind of thing.
And then we have a question about the acronym NGSS.
Is the Next Generation Science Standards, is what NGSS stands for. And if you simply Google NGSS, it will pull you to the site where the standards are explained in detail. And Achieve, which is the organization that led the writing, they pulled together experts, science education experts. There's a wealth of resources on the use of NGSS at that site.
I noted that there were a few questions that I know you answered individually about the alignment between some of the materials that you shared today and the standards. And I wondered if you could both talk just a little bit more about that, because it seems like there's a lot of questions about those standards. So maybe just a little more discussion about the alignment between the curriculum that you shared today and those standards would be very helpful.
Go ahead and start. The standards are called out throughout the teacher materials in a medical mystery. So if you go to that site, bscs.org/medical mystery, that's where you can register for the teacher version. And in that teacher version, it steps you through page by page which performance expectations are hit on each chapter, and when and where you have full 3D learning opportunities, 3-dimensional learning opportunities, and where and when you finally hit the culmination of developing a performance expectation. So they're fully embedded in the teacher materials on the actual resource.
For the Smithsonian Science for Global Goals curriculum, it's aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and those are called out both in the text, because it's a community research guide. There's only one for teachers and students, and so they are called out in the text. For our games and simulations, they should be listed on the websites, but if you're unable to find the standards alignment, please feel free to reach out to us at scienceeducation@si.edu, and we'd be happy to pass along all the information that we've put together.
And each of the curriculum resources I shared on the last slide are NGSS aligned and would explicitly state which grade level they're targeted to and where they feel as though they fit best, so that they are very teacher user friendly and can be easily adapted in a variety of grade levels for whatever a teacher would need and subject area.
Your next question, any support or resources for AP science teachers for virtual learning?
We don't have anything AP specific, but we do have high school resources that could be useful.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it too carefully, but and this is more from my own personal experience having a high schooler in a couple AP classes, is Khan Academy. It's not so teacher focused, but it's ancillary material that students can move through, and it's very, very closely aligned to the AP curriculum. And we've been using that with my high schooler with some success. I have not seen kind of science education sites explicitly aligning curriculum materials as ancillary materials for the AP in the online setting at this point. But as you know, as we work more with this, I can certainly post some things as I find them. But my go-to, and that's from a parent perspective, my go-to right now for AP is Khan Academy.
It looks like we have about 4 minutes left, so if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A chat here with the time remaining.
And just as folks, oh, looks like there's one question. I'll hold on.
So we have a participant who said Howard Hughes Medical Institute has almost exclusively high school and AP material. So that would be a resource for the person who asked the AP material, and it's Howard Hughes, HHMI, for the AP material. So thank you for that. And I did mention on May 6th, Wednesday, May 6th at 7 o'clock, we will be sponsoring a webinar for parents and caregivers. Now, science does have, many parents are afraid of science, right? Afraid of science and math. They themselves didn't have great experiences. So we will be presenting a webinar at 7 o'clock on May 6th with curriculum resources and examples of how you can make it easier for a parent or caregiver to support their students in the online space with science instruction. Quick question, any advice on teaching our young children the science behind COVID-19? I would say age appropriate. Break it down for very young students. I think at this point, I would suggest the importance of hygiene and keeping one, why things like washing your hands, why things like social distancing are helpful in the state that our world is in right now, and keep it there. And again, that's a question of comfort with parents, of how much you feel sharing with your students or sharing with your own children about the COVID crisis. So you have younger kids, right? What have you done as a parent?
I've been really careful about keeping it simple and not terrifying them.
Mm-hmm.
They occasionally look over my shoulder and see me reading a New York Times with graphs, and occasionally they're curious about the number of cases. And we talk about the graphs and we talk about the changes, but I also try to remind them that it's, you know, they're probably pretty safe because we're all home and staying home, and we talk about hand washing. And I think keeping the news off and not playing in the background has been a really good thing, because it's my kids are aware of it. Clearly they're not going to school, but it's not omnipresent, which I think is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my children are older. I have a 14 and a 16-year-old, and even my 14-year-old is very concerned about the news. So we do something similar, as we don't do not much news when the kids are up and around, because it is scary.
Your next question, do you know of any resources to support heredity and traits at the 4th grade level? So often materials are for older grades.
Does Smithsonian or BSCS have anything specific to that?
I don't think specifically for 4th grade.
Yeah, what I would suggest is right now NSTA has a free membership for a month, and I had one on my desk, a Science and Children magazine. Here it is. This is the journal that comes out of NSTA. It's called Science and Children. That's focused on elementary grades. And if you get into the NSTA site and start searching their digital archives, take advantage of the 30-day free membership, start looking for their digital archives. They will have whole magazines focused on certain elementary topics. And I know there was one on heredity relatively recently. And you can pull up actual lessons and resources focused on very specific topics. That would be the best place I would suggest for you. You know the information is vetted, it's been written by teachers, it's gone through a peer review process. So it'll be something of quality that you can take and adapt into the online.
Well, I hate to cut in here because I know this has been such a helpful and useful discussion for many, but we are at time and I want to be ultra respectful of our educators' time. I think if you have additional questions, please do feel free to email our panelists. But I want to thank you all especially for joining us. And I also want to just let you know that we are, as I mentioned, hosting these webinars for educators every Friday on different topics, same time, 3 to 4 p.m. And I'll just mention that next week's topic is virtual professional and personal learning communities with Dr. Robert Shand, Assistant Professor of Education Policy and Leadership at the School of Education. And I know this is a time when teachers are probably missing their communities deeply. And so finding ways to create virtual learning communities and what that looks like for teachers and how that can connect with student learning as well. And best practice will be a wonderful topic that Dr. Shand will discuss next week. So we hope you all can join us. And I hope that you can join me in thanking so much Dr. Parker as well as our panelists here. This is one of the things I most appreciate about Dr. Parker being with us at the School of Education is she has such deep and wonderful connections to both research and practice and folks doing the good work of figuring out what aspects of science education and curriculum can truly be evidence-based to improve student learning. And you could really hear that among this panel today. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. Thank the audience and thank the panelists. And we hope that you all will join us again next week.
And thank you, Sue and Reuben. Thanks, Corbin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great Friday, everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.